Although it is impossible to draw broad conclusions from a single personal account, many former pupils who experienced school life in Britain during the mid-20th century have noted striking differences between disciplinary practices in Scotland and England. One of the most frequently discussed contrasts concerns the widespread use of the Tawse in Scottish schools, compared with the generally more limited use of the cane in many English schools. In Scotland, corporal punishment formed an established part of everyday school discipline for much of the 20th century. The Tawse, a thick leather strap with a split tail, was regarded as the standard disciplinary implement in most state schools. By comparison, in many English schools, the cane was often reserved for more serious offences, meaning that pupils were less likely to receive corporal punishment for routine classroom misconduct. One example often cited is lateness. In many Scottish schools, arriving late without a satisfactory excuse frequently resulted in an immediate visit to the head teacher or a designated member of staff for a punishment with the Tawse. Such routine use of corporal punishment for relatively minor infractions contrasted with the experience reported by many pupils educated in England, where lateness was more commonly dealt with through detentions, extra work, or verbal reprimands, rather than an immediate caning. Variation. Between Scottish schools, the use of the Tawse was by no means identical across Scotland. Practices varied considerably depending on several factors, including the decade, the location and social background of the school, the policies of the head teacher, and the attitudes of individual members of staff. Some schools were known for frequent use of the strap, while others relied upon it only occasionally. Academic streaming also influenced how often pupils encountered corporal punishment. In many schools, pupils placed in lower academic streams generally received the Tawse more frequently than those in higher achieving classes. Whether this reflected differences in behaviour, disciplinary expectations, or teaching methods varied from school to school. The years in which pupils were most likely to receive the Tawse were generally from primary 5 through to secondary 3, although it remained available throughout both primary and secondary education. Records and recollections suggest that the highest incidence of punishment occurred around the ages of 14 for boys and 15 for girls. Differences between boys and girls. Patterns of punishment also reflected differences in behaviour between male and female pupils, as perceived by teachers of the time. Girls generally attracted fewer corporal punishments than boys. Many teachers believed that girls were more conscientious, quieter in class, and less likely to break school rules. As they entered adolescence, however, some teachers felt that girls were more inclined to answer back or display open defiance, leading to a modest increase in punishments during the mid-teenage years. Boys, by contrast, were more frequently disciplined for behaviour such as fighting, excessive noise, classroom disruption, swearing, practical jokes, and displays of bravado, particularly in mixed classes. Such conduct often resulted in significantly higher rates of corporal punishment. The teaching profession itself reflected the educational workforce of the period. Approximately 80% of teachers were women and 20% were men, particularly within primary education, although senior disciplinary roles, such as head teachers, remained disproportionately occupied by men for much of the era. Regardless of gender, both male and female teachers in Scottish schools could be authorised to administer the Tawse, although local practice varied considerably. As a consequence of these behavioural differences, very few boys completed their school careers without receiving at least one punishment with the Tawse. Some were punished only occasionally, while others accumulated dozens of punishments over the years. Contemporary accounts even describe a minority of persistently disruptive pupils receiving several punishments within a single week. One particularly extreme recollection concerns a boy who was reportedly strapped 9 separate times during a single lesson after repeatedly continuing his disruptive behaviour despite successive punishments. An English experience. One personal recollection highlights how disciplinary practices could differ south of the border. During a school holiday visit to relatives living near London, I accompanied my uncle to collect my cousin from school. As the final bell rang, hundreds of pupils streamed out through the gates and gradually dispersed towards home. yet my cousin did not appear. Several minutes later, 6 boys finally emerged together. Their expressions were subdued, and each was quietly rubbing his hands as they walked away from the school. They explained that they had all been instructed to report to the head teacher immediately after lessons for corporal punishment. The delay had resulted from gathering all the boys together, listening to a formal lecture about their behaviour, and then receiving the cane in turn. From what I remember, each boy received 4 strokes across the hands. Unfortunately, I no longer recall the offence that had led to the punishment. What remained memorable, however, was the organised nature of the process. Rather than being dealt with immediately after an incident, as often happened with the Tawse in Scottish schools, the punishment had been postponed until the end of the school day and administered to several pupils during a single session. Whether this represented normal practice in that particular English school or was simply reserved for more serious disciplinary cases is difficult to say. Experiences varied widely between schools, counties, and individual head teachers. Nevertheless, the incident illustrates one of the perceived differences between Scottish and English school discipline. In Scotland, the Tawse was often used routinely for a broad range of everyday offences, whereas in many English schools the cane appeared to be employed more selectively, often following referral to the head teacher and accompanied by a more formal disciplinary procedure.